The specific character of despair is precisely this: it is unaware of being despair. Soren Kierkegaard, The Sickness Unto Death. Well, how could that be? I mean, you would either know you're in despair or not, right? I mean, if you're unhappy, then you're in despair. And if you're happy and you're watching television shows and having beer and popcorn, you're not living in despair. You might very well be living in despair, but just don't know it.
Mm. Welcome to the Subversive Orthodoxy Podcast. I'm your host, Travis Mullen, and I'm excited to have you with us. This is a podcast about philosophy and meaning. It is about how we as humans withstand the challenges of our cultures. It is about the general Judeo-Christian revelation of God in the world and how the bloodiest century ever recorded couldn't kill that revelation. It's also about how that revelation, tossed aside as archaic, outdated, and obsolete, may be the very life-giving power we need to resist this distracted techno state we're living in, full of anxiety, depression, and teenage suicide.
It's great entertainment, thrilling entertainment. It's the inside story packed with drama.
Sometimes when I get bored, I like to fly above the clouds, and I ask the Lord, what does it take to get down? And every time I ask, He teaches me the same thing. Just bleed originality.
Walker Percy was born in 1916 in Birmingham, Alabama, into a prominent Southern family marked by repeated tragedy. His grandfather died by suicide, followed years later by his father, and then his mother under circumstances widely believed to be suicide. After his parents' death, Percy and his two brothers were taken in by their cousin, the writer and lawyer William Alexander Percy, in Greenville, Mississippi. The Percy household exposed him early to literature, civic responsibility, and the moral complexity of Southern life. These early experiences shaped his lifelong attention to despair, memory, and the search for meaning. Percy was trained as a physician and earned his medical degree from Columbia University, completing a residency in pathology. While working at Bellevue Hospital in New York, he contracted tuberculosis, which forced him into extended isolation at sanatoriums in the Adirondacks. During this period, Percy turned intensively to reading and reflection. He engaged deeply with writers and thinkers such as Soren Kierkegaard and Fyodor Dostoevsky, whose work would later inform both the themes and the structure of his fiction. His illness effectively ended his medical career and redirected his vocation toward writing. After recovering, Percy settled in Louisiana, where he lived for most of his adult life, particularly in New Orleans area. He converted to Roman Catholicism in 1947, a commitment that quietly shaped his worldview and writing. His faith did not function as a literary program or an apologetic framework, but as a lens through which he examined the modern condition. Percy's work repeatedly returns to the experience of alienation in an age marked by scientific confidence, consumer abundance, and spiritual dislocation. Percy's best known for his first novel, The Moviegoer, which won the National Book Award in 1962. The novel introduced many of the concerns that would define his career: the boredom of modern life, the fragmentation of the self, and the difficulty of authentic existence within technologically advancing societies. His later novels continue this exploration, often set in the American South and centered on characters who sense that something essential has gone missing in their lives. In addition to fiction, Percy wrote a substantial body of nonfiction, including The Message in the Bottle and Lost in the Cosmos. In these works, he engaged philosophy, cultural criticism, and semiotics to examine how modern people understood language, selfhood, and reality. Drawing on the works of Charles Saunders Peirce, Percy argued that many modern pathologies arise from misunderstanding of symbols and the nature of the human person. Walker Percy died in 1990. His work continues to be read across disciplines, including literature, theology, philosophy, and cultural criticism. He remains a singular voice in American letters, attentive to the inner life of modern people, and the conditions that shape their sense of meaning, belief, and identity. Welcome back, Professor Larry.
Thanks so much, Travis. Looking forward to talking about Walker Percy today.
And Happy New Year to everyone.
Yeah.
It's February. We took a month off there.
Well, now is February our 1-year anniversary?
No, it was January.
Oh, it was January.
Yeah, I think the first episode was January 17th.
Oh, really? Okay. Well,
yeah, so congrats.
Yeah, congrats. Yeah, we made it a year.
So in order for us to get a kind of an intro into Percy Walker and where we're going, he, as you hear in the intro bio, he loved and got a lot from Kierkegaard and Dostoevsky. So it's almost like he's a compounding asset to subversive orthodoxy's train of thought. So that's kind of exciting. As far as what did he produce, let's go over his notable works. I have a little list here. The Moviegoer was his first breakout novel in 1961, and it won a National Book Award, as we said in the intro. Number 2 is 1966, The Last Gentleman. Centers on a character, Will Barnett, a man afflicted with memory gaps and existential dislocation. A lot of his stuff sounds like it's critiquing modern culture, basically. So the next is Love in the Ruins, 1971. A satirical novel set in the near future America, unraveling through political, racial, and spiritual fragmentation. Ooh, that sounds interesting. One of his most overt cultural critiques. And then Lancelot in 1977, a darker, more violent novel framed as a confession. The Second Coming, 1980, returns Will Barrett later, who is the guy from The Last Gentleman, as he wrestles with despair, faith, and the possibility of belief after the collapse of modern certainty. Gosh, these themes sound so relevant. And then The Thanatos Syndrome, 1987, a sequel of sorts to Love in the Ruins, explores scientific experimentation, behavioral control, and the reduction of the human person to chemistry and technique. Man, he liked to nail these themes, huh?
Yeah, and the connections are with contemporary issues are direct, and I'm surprised there's not kind of a Walker Percy renaissance with some of these books, but we can talk about that.
Maybe that's what we're about to spark.
Yeah.
And then on his nonfiction, so these are more like in a realm of cultural critique and philosophy, you'd say?
Yeah, and
Message in a Bottle.
Well, he was a pathologist, but he was also trained in psychiatry. So he brings a knowledge of brain science, at least brain science as it was evolving in the early 60s, to bear a lot of these cultural issues. And so a lot of the ideas are still relevant to the questions people are asking.
So Lost in the Cosmos, 1983 sounds interesting, written as a satirical self-help book.
Yeah, it has quizzes and questions in the back, and you select from 3 choices, and he gives you a spiritual diagnosis of your existential state.
No way.
Yeah.
That sounds wild.
So I might read a couple of those and give you a chance to decide which of the 4 you would pick.
And then he's got one 1991 that was published after his death, Signposts in a Strange Land, a wide-ranging essay collection addressing culture, education, medicine. Sounds like everything, medicine, faith, and crisis of meaning. It sounds like he was addressing a lot of the same things as Ivan Illich.
Yeah.
Like education, medicine, all that.
Yeah,
faith.
Except Ivan Illich had a kind of a sociological point of view, and Walker Percy is almost entirely psychological and spiritual and existential in his critique. So he's more interested in the individual.
How would you describe the difference? Because I don't really know what you just said.
Well, Ivan Illich, right? He wrote Tools for Conviviality was one of his big books, and the Deschooling Society. And so these were big social proposals for social reforms. And Walker Percy is more...
Wait, just so the audience knows, Ivan Illich is later in the book too, so we're going to be hitting him towards the end.
Yes.
of all of our characters.
Yeah, and he was a Jesuit priest, and he was born in Puerto Rico, and he worked in New York City and in Mexico, and um, he was involved with a lot of social reforms and uh,
So
the
when Percy writes Signposts in a Strange Land, he addresses culture, education, medicine, faith, and meaning. Is he not kind of a contemporarily hitting some of the same stuff? Or how old was Ivan Illich? Let me check. Or if they were
they're pretty
contemporaries.
close. You're right. They're pretty close.
Yeah, because he died in 2002.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they're pretty contemporary.
Although Walker Percy was from the South, and so he's a little bit more of an eccentric in a relationship to the main trends.
Oh, yeah.
He was
Illich was European.
yeah, he was nobody's hippie, but at the same time he was this sort of radical Christian. So you couldn't say he was, a traditionalist. So it's it'll be fun to talk about him today and what he was all about. I think the one way to think of it is he was more of a Kierkegaardian Walker Percy. He was an existential Christian, and I think Ivan Illich was more of a liberation theologian.
Well, just seeing Walker Percy coming from a psychological person who is very immersed in Kierkegaard and coming from that angle of like psychology and existentialism, and then hearing that Illich is more coming from a Catholic European liberation theologian, that does make sense to me.
Yeah. Okay. Good. So
those are two categories I can understand.
Yeah, and not that they contradicted one another, but they had different language, different kind of terminologies they used to describe contemporary life and
different things they were trying to accomplish, maybe too.
Yeah, and different themes. If Ivan Illich, wrote a book on the educational system, and Walker Percy wrote about the psychology of education. So you can kind of see they're complementary, but
one word that came up in here that I didn't know what it was semiotics, or am I saying it right?
Semiotics.
What is that?
That's the study of signs.
Like symbols?
Like symbols and like memes. That's why Walker Percy you would think, in a world of memes. That Walker Percy.
What did memes mean before now? Because we know what we think it means now, but did it have a meaning before that?
Well, it wasn't quite as filled with meaning as it is now. There's a lot of different senses of memes now, I think, but I think at the time a meme was more like a sign. In 1961, he talks about Pierce, the philosopher who was also a semiotician, who did philosophy of the way things are made to mean through signs and symbols and sign systems. So semiology is kind of like mythology, except you're not looking at myths, you're looking at signs. And we would think of signs more like there are signs and there are memes and there are different kinds of signs. And so we have a little bit more familiarity with that. Like the structuralists were all semiologists. And then the post-structuralists did a critique of semiology. And so that's what we get with, in the last 20 years or so. But Walker Percy was going back to Pierce and semiology as a way to talk about some of these contemporary problems that scientists have, because he was himself he went to medical school. So he would try to talk to his fellow doctors about existentialism and existential Catholicism in particular, and they would blink their eyes and say, well, I don't know about being in itself. That is does not make any sense to me. So he tried to bridge that gap by coming up with a theory of semiology that a scientist could understand, but at the same time address the existential problems of a contemporary person of faith.
Okay.
So
Let's pause for a second because I got to fill some of this in because I did not know about this. I did not know about semiotics or the origin of the word meme. So I got to add this into the equation here.
okay.
So it's one of the fun facts about Walker Percy, number 6. We haven't read them yet, but that's why I was asking about semiotics because I didn't know what that meant.
Yeah.
It said Percy was deeply interested in semiotics, especially the philosophy of Charles Saunders Peirce, which you mentioned, and believed modern confusion about meaning was partly linguistic. So then you're saying it had to do with memes and how ideas are passed along.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
and you've mentioned this before, The Selfish Gene by Richard Dawkins. He coined the word meme then, 1976. It was a shortening of the Greek word meme, M-I-M-E-E, which is not, not Greek letters. That's our transliteration. But it meant imitated thing.
Okay.
Chosen to sound similar to gene. But the mechanism, so Dawkins was saying that
mimetic. It's like it's like a meme is like
imitating
a mimetic sign or emblem or symbol.
So which of our characters is talking about mimetic desire?
Rene Girard.
Oh, we're not there yet.
Yeah, we haven't got to him yet. His is a whole philosophy of mimetic.
So that's related to the same word, right?
Yeah.
Has to do with imitation.
Yeah.
And miming.
And
So
and he has a direct. I don't know if he knew Walker Percy. I mean, I don't know if he read Walker Percy because Walker Percy's kind of a comic novelist, but and Rene Girard was a French, scholar of the novel, but of mostly French novels. And so I don't know if he knew about Walker Percy, but they would certainly have fit together. They would have been great to have on a panel discussion, between Walker Percy and Rene Girard. Rene Girard, the French prophet, and Walker Percy, the Southern jokester, who's that would have been an interesting conversation.
But this brought up an incredibly relevant modern phenomenon I never even looked into is where the word meme came from.
Yeah.
So here's a little bit more about it. So
yeah, let's unfold this.
Dawkins created the term to act as a cultural counterpart to the biological gene, suggesting that ideas replicate, mutate, and evolve just like genes do.
Yeah.
And memes propagate by leaping from brain to brain via a process of imitation.
Yeah,
and they are passed down through generations and spread across society through communication. So that's pretty interesting. I did not know there was some actual architecture of the word meme. Thought that went into it.
Yeah, and we're participating in the memeverse through the podcast here.
And it took on a steroid, insane effect once you have the new digital type memes, but now the word makes sense from its history, like an idea that spreads just from brain to brain.
Yeah,
or
and
from
then,
laugh to laugh.
And then some survive and some die and some become really important and others.
Yeah, some become part of the culture and the language.
Yeah.
Which that's kind of crazy.
Yeah, and shape brains, and then the people that are into advertising and marketing.
So Percy was very interested in that. And it's sort of like a symbol.
Yeah, it's a sign. Symbols are kind of you reserved for more potent signs, that have history and tradition behind them and multiple meanings. And whereas a sign is more like just normal language. But for Percy, the language is what is unique to the human condition. So he uses the example of of Helen Keller. If you remember the
Yeah.
what was that thing?
The water pump scene.
The Miracle Worker movie. That scene where they want to fire the teacher.
Is that in this book? Yeah, this is in your book.
Yeah.
We actually should read it. Like that'll be a great piece.
Okay,
because that's where I was like, where did I hear that? And I just looked at my book and it's right there in the first pages of Percy.
It's kind of long, but
but it's an incredible story.
Yeah, let's see if I could summarize it without reading it. Might be.
Well, we don't need to read it right now. I'm saying let's come back to it and read it.
Yeah, okay, we can do that.
It'd actually be a great piece for this episode.
Yeah.
But yeah, so let me do the 10 interesting or lesser known facts about it.
Okay, great.
And then we can go wherever you take us from there. And then I have a few themes or quotes if we're running out of gas or anything.
Okay.
So the 10 fun facts are: number 1, Percy originally trained and worked as a medical pathologist, not a writer, and expected medicine to be his lifelong vocation. Okay, we already knew that.
Yeah.
Number 2, we already know that. Tuberculosis. Right. So 3, he read Kierkegaard. We know that, but he read it before most modern novelists, which shaped his understanding of despair, selfhood, and indirect communication. Mm-hmm. So he kind of like set his own foundation with Kierkegaard.
Exactly.
Number 4, Percy converted Roman Catholic as an adult in 1947 after long philosophical searching rather than childhood formation. So that's also an interesting story. I'd love to hear how that happened. But number 5, he deliberately avoided writing religious fiction that sounded like theology in narrative form. He believed that belief collapses when stated too directly.
Amen.
That's a cool thought.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. It's like the opposite of what I always thought.
Yeah.
Number 6, Percy was deeply interested in semiotics. Yeah, we already said that. Number 7, he distrusted psychology when it reduced the human person to behavior or pathology, despite being trained in medicine himself.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so he just distrusted when it was just all science. Is that what that means?
It means that you take a human being and you flatten out their personality into a diagnosis, and then you prescribe therapies and drugs to reshape behavior. And he thought that was a radical misreading of the nature of human identity and the soul, insofar as doctors would have a word for the soul. They usually don't ask you how your soul is doing. So that's part of the thing that he was trying to sort of break through and sort of show that the human beings are pilgrims on Earth. They're not organisms in environments. And if you think of them as organisms in environments, then you have a very flat and manipulative notion of humanity. And it doesn't deal with the true complexity, which is dealt with in his novels in very humorous ways. So we'll get to that.
Yeah. He like all the other subversive orthodoxy writers seems to be fighting for the soul, a multi-dimensional human being rather than a flattened scientific human being.
Right, but he wants to come up with a definition of the soul that would satisfy a scientist.
So that's like what he's trying to do through psychology.
So that makes him kind of really interesting in the kind of arguments he makes, because he is aware that if a psychiatrist read his novel or read his essay, he would like him to be convinced and not just simply put it down the minute he mentions soul.
My good friend Tyrell sent me a few, and he loves the podcast, so he'll hear this. Sent me a few excerpts of Mark Twain. It really sounded like that, like he was analyzing human identity and behavior from a point of, actually no, like he was trying to say it was pretty much a scientific fact, just this is how people are. So if they're a thief, they're a thief.
Yeah.
And it was a very interesting argument coming from Mark Twain.
Yeah.
It was like in his own personal, like his
Well,
own like I don't know what you call him, like his own thoughts kind of writing.
oh yeah, yeah.
Um,
Well, that was that period after his daughter died, and he went through a very dark time, and uh, came out with a very dark view of reality. But um, he
yeah,
also wrote these great humanistic novels, and so he's somebody that you take seriously. You know, you don't dismiss Mark
yeah.
Twain. Yeah.
The one quote from Percy on what you were just saying about the pilgrim, like that human's a pilgrim, not some flat thing to be
Yeah.
tested in a lab.
Mhm.
His actual quote in Lost in the Cosmos,
Mhm.
or no, this is paraphrased quote: "The self is no longer a pilgrim, but a consumer." So that was his
Yeah.
criticism, that the self
Yeah.
was getting lost to consumerism, which is,
Yeah.
not
We
relevant at all.
well, we solved all our problems, and then we were left unhappy. Like
Yeah.
one of the characters, I don't, I think it's in Lost in the Ruins, is a guy who um, retires to Florida after working his whole life, and he's got this, right next to a golf course, and he plays 18 holes every day, and he's got servants in his house and everything, and he just falls into this deep depression. Uh,
Mm.
and he comes to the doctor in Lost in the Ruins, and the guy in Lost in the Ruins is based on kind of Walker Percy type guy, and he's developed a meter that reads your soul's health,
Oh wow,
and so he attaches it.
that's in Lost in the Ruins.
Yeah, Lost in the Ruins. He calls it the lapsometer, where you lapse from meaning.
Hmm.
And so he gives this guy an exam on the lapsometer, and says, well, when you first came down here, you were really, you were top on the lapsometer. Everything was new and meaningful. And now it's been 6 months and you're down to like -4 on all the lapsometer numbers. We gotta get those numbers up, or you're going to commit suicide or just die drinking. Here, even though you've got all the things you thought you wanted when you retired to Florida.
Yeah,
And
that's cool.
and so the guy says, well, okay, let's get those numbers up. There's
Yeah.
there's kind of stuff like this also in Vonnegut. I didn't have Vonnegut in the book, but one of his sci-fi novels opens with the line something like, this story begins at the end of the 20th century, before we were able to scientifically prove the 32 aspects of the soul and how to heal them.
Hmm.
So he was imagining a sci-fi future in which the inner life becomes part of our understanding of ourselves rather than a denial of the soul's reality.
Yeah.
So that's part of what the moviegoer is getting into. So
Yeah. So that one, the last three of the fun facts,
okay, let's go.
The Moviegoer being his first novel, winning a National Book Award, that was an unusual first book trajectory.
Yes.
That usually doesn't happen. So that was incredible. Put him on the map, that's why we're still talking about him. Obviously, he struck a nerve.
Well, and I wanted to read you this on the fun fact of who he was up against that year for the novel of the year. J.D. Salinger's Franny and Zoe,
Wow.
Joseph Heller's Catch-22, and Isaac Bashevis Singer's The Spinoza of Market Street. So Salinger, Heller, Singer, and Mr. Nobody from Louisiana.
Yeah, that's cool. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And then it says he resisted being labeled as a Southern writer, even though place and regional culture matter deeply in his work.
Mm-hmm.
So he didn't want to get pigeonholed as a Southern writer.
Yeah.
And he believed modern people suffer less from ignorance and more from misdiagnosis, especially false accounts of what the human person is.
Exactly. Yeah. And, he's almost an exact contemporary, I think, of Flannery O'Connor. He's very close in age to Flannery O'Connor. So they were like kind of the two of the big Catholic writers of that time period
and Southern.
Yeah, and Southern.
Even though he said, "Don't call me a Southern writer."
Yeah, right. Yeah, you call Flannery O'Connor a Southern writer. Don't call me a Southern writer.
Yeah, she'd be like, "No, I'm Southern Gothic."
Yeah, well, that's the other thing, that where they didn't like to be called Southern Gothics, either one of them, and I think Flannery O'Connor wrote an essay on the Southern novel, and in which she said that the only thing you could say about the Southern novel is that they're all peculiar. They're all kind of very idiosyncratic and kind of strange people, and the kinds of novels that nobody else ever wrote. They're written by Flannery O'Connor, and Walker Percy writes these strange novels that are like these sci-fi neuroscience novels where he deals with these Kierkegaardian existential categories in a scientific context.
Mm-hmm.
And so it becomes they're both very interesting, but they're both kind of not, easy sells. They're not real popular kinds of things. Like Flannery O'Connor, some people just don't get it, and I think the same with Walker Percy, although Walker Percy, I think, is actually more accessible. I think you either get Flannery O'Connor or you don't, but I think Walker Percy, you kind of go to some of the other books and figure out what he's up to.
You were just talking about Flannery O'Connor.
Yeah.
I find her to be very readable for me.
Oh, good.
And I've read, I think, 4 or 5 or 6 of her short stories.
Yeah.
And I really like them. I mean, they're all dark as heck.
Yeah.
Like they have horrible endings, and
right.
they're, I don't know, they're rough, but they're so good.
Yeah. Well, those endings are, challenging for some people, like, well, what's that mean? The grandma would have been a nice lady if there had been somebody to blow her brains out every day line in that story.
It's in one of the stories?
Yeah. A good man is hard to find.
Oh, what's the quote you said?
The guy who shoots her says she wouldn't have been a bad woman if there'd been somebody around to shoot her every day of her life. Shoot her in the head every day of her life. Keep her.
Yeah, that was a crazy one. That was, like, I think, the first one I read.
Yeah, and it certainly invites reflection, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think her and Percy were both doing something similar, where they're trying to shake up the modern person with reality.
Yeah, yeah. That's basically it.
They're not writing fantasy.
That's it. Yeah.
They're writing like real things that happen, and real thoughts, and real rawness, of humanity.
Yeah, and the thing with Percy's Moviegoer is, and the thing that makes it kind of unique that he was able to like win an award for this is the subject is largely everydayness, the everyday life, boredom and self-satisfaction and disinterest in anything beyond your own pleasure and your money and your circumstances, and I guess you would call that, 50s alienation or something, and how it plays itself out in the Gulf Coast with these wealthy families and his own life.
Mm-hmm.
Is kind of how the book works. And if you don't experience that as a kind of doldrums, then you're wondering, well, what's he complaining about?
Yeah.
And so it and from time to time he'll give these Kierkegaardian analysis of anxiety and dread and these things, but he'll do it in like modern 61 everyday speech about how is that playing itself out in everyday life.
Yeah.
And because Kierkegaard, the examples are, the late 19th century, and the language is abstract. So how do you get that across to people? You kind of try to bring it up into the present, but the present for him is 1961. So
it shows how smart Percy was to be able to be so into Kierkegaard, though.
Yeah,
because Kierkegaard is not hard to read.
Right. Well, let me. Or did we get all the fun facts?
Oh yeah. Okay. We're on to wherever you want to go, and we can read some of your book too on the way, along the way. Which I'll read part of it, or you can read part of it. The Helen Keller story.
Okay.
But go wherever you want right now.
Okay. Well, before we get into that, I want to read the epigram to the Moviegoer.
Okay.
Which is the little quote at the beginning of the book. And the quote at the beginning of the book is, "The specific character of despair is precisely this: it is unaware of being despair." Soren Kierkegaard, The Sickness Unto Death. Now, I can imagine that blowing a few minds as the preface to this novel, because it's almost like, he's opening with a Zen koan or something, from Franny and Zoe or something. But the specific character of despair is precisely this, that it's unaware of being despair. Well, how could that be? I mean, you would either know you're in despair or not, right? I mean, if you're unhappy, then you're in despair. And if you're happy and you're watching television shows and having beer and popcorn, you're not living in despair. But from a Kierkegaardian perspective, you might very well be living in despair, but just don't know it. And so there's two types of despair. There's psychological or emotional despair, which is a feeling. And then for Kierkegaard, there's that existential state of despair. Now, the existential state isn't a feeling, it's your relationship to God. Or if you want to put it in more secular language, like Walker Percy uses it, it's your relationship to the absolute. And if you don't have any relationship to the absolute, then you can, from a Kierkegaardian point of view, you could live a very pleasant life and be a very powerful person, but be living in despair because you never really exist in reality. You exist in this bubble of false consciousness and illusion. And he thinks, as Kierkegaard would, that's a worse fate than living a life of happy illusion. And so the character in the Moviegoer is a guy who begins the novel kind of living in existential despair, but not in emotional or psychological despair. In fact, his life's going really well. He has a lot of girlfriends.
Yeah, like he kind of sounds like he feels like he has it curated just the way he wants it.
Yeah, he's got everything he needs. Well, then why is he feeling this emptiness, right? Why does it seem that being on the aesthetic level of pleasing yourself isn't making him, there's something missing? Well, it's not an emotion, it's not sex, it's not money. He's got all those things. It's something deeper. It's like meaninglessness sort of thing. And so he's trying to find a meaning. And so he's looking for, well, maybe I'll be a doctor, maybe I'll get married. But none of these things, are really strike him. And so he there's a passage in there where he says, so where he kind of moves from his aesthetic, the three Kierkegaardian stages where the aesthetic, existential, you look at life aesthetically as pleasure and pain and happiness and unhappiness. And then there's the ethical level, which is the second level. And that's justice, doing the right thing, being a good person as a way of giving your life meaning beyond just the happiness and unhappiness of the aesthete. And that takes you so far about...
This was from Kierkegaard, right? The three levels?
This is from Kierkegaard, the three levels. And so he kind of moves more toward the ethical in the course of this.
So Walker Percy's experimenting it out.
Yeah,
experimenting out Kierkegaard's philosophy with this character in his novel.
Yeah, and he's trying to describe people in terms of these existential categories that they may or may not be aware of, that they're exemplars of.
Okay, so Professor.
Yeah.
Can you remember where you're at so you don't lose it while I interlude something?
Sure.
What is it about? How are we going to remember where you're going? He's moving into the ethical?
Yeah.
Okay. That's just something that is so remarkable to me over this last year with you, like going through these authors and these writers and hearing how much they put into their books as far as like philosophy and heart and soul. And that's really inspired me a lot in writing, in the power of writing. And, like a movie does something once, but it's like books just live on and they keep going to the next generation. I mean, movies do too, but books just can do a lot more than a movie. The movie, everyone says the book was better.
Yeah. Well, the books are deeper.
Yeah. And obviously you can flesh out a lot more thought through a book. Yeah.
And the other thing is, as you're finding out, there are people that can read as deep as you can write. And there might not be a lot of them, but they're the ones you want to read your stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to do justice for them, because why else read a book? If you're just going to read it for entertainment, just get some schlocky romance novel or something. But if that's too much work for a romance novel. Why not just watch a bad TV show? But if you're going to take the effort to read a book or read an essay, it better have something there that is, soulful.
Well, that's something I wonder about movies, though. How do they make so much? I mean, I don't know how. It's totally relevant to this, but I don't know exactly how. But like, how do you make so much trash movies as quote unquote entertainment? And there's so much work that goes into movies and so much money. I'm like, I do not know how they make so many bad movies.
Yes.
I honestly do not know. It baffles my mind.
Yes. Well, I heard an interview on television a few years ago, and this director had won the National Humanitarian Award for the film that he made that year. I forget who it was. And they said, I bet the interviewer said, I bet you're really proud of this award. And he says, I don't want to seem ungrateful, but this isn't that hard of an award to win, given the number of awful movies that are produced in this country. No one really is that interested in producing a meaningful film except for a handful of directors. And we all compete for this damn humanitarian award every year, but there should be at least 20 or 50 other directors who could do this if they just change their focus on what movies are for them, rather than just bringing in a box office, but giving expression to deep truths about the human experience. That's really the only reason to do this. Once you've made your first 500,000, what are you worried about? Why not make something of lasting value?
I mean, so much work goes into movies, more than even a book. I can't fathom how they can put so many movies out there. It's just total trash, meaningless crap.
Yeah.
Anyways, that was a aside.
Okay, so, right. Back to
Walker Percy's character is moving into the ethical in the book, The Moviegoer.
Yes, but he's still pretty aesthetic, you
He
know,
likes his movies and his ladies.
his ladies and his movies, and he likes his aunt, who's old school aristocrat from the South, but he comes from a family of suicides, so there's always the question: is this all there is? Isn't there a deeper meaning behind the good life that we got here in Louisiana, in our pricey suburb here?
Do you mean the character came from suicide too?
No, the actual
Percy himself.
Percy himself.
Yeah, yeah.
But the
Three suicides.
character, I don't know. I think there is in the character Binks. I think there is a reference to somebody in the family who would have mental illness or something that might be a reference to his own situation. But yeah, and there's go ahead.
Frederick Buechner, is that how you say his name?
Yeah,
His father committed suicide too.
yeah, it's not
And
uncommon.
they're
for writers.
contemporaries
Yeah,
as well. They're both kind of coming from that spiritual writer, but not directly spiritual. Actually, no, Frederick Buechner is much more spiritual, I guess, like overtly in his writing. But yeah, so it was anyways, they both had that in common. That was interesting.
yeah, and
Back to you.
okay. So I don't know if he gets all the way to the religious at the end. I mean, he might. I like to think that he is moving toward the religious, but that's a kind of for Kierkegaard. What happens is you see that the ethical world, if you want to do the right thing, that gives you a purpose, but now you're caught up in the language of what's the right thing, the good guys versus bad guys, and you don't understand. You're not as open as a religious person to God's paradoxes, that the last may become first and the first may become last. And so it's not easy for you to depend upon your own ethical judgments to give you direction in life. You have to depend on something that transcends your own ethical judgment, even though that's better than just being happy and eating and going to movies. It's a search for a purpose. And at one point in the Moviegoer, he has a great line where he says, that the awakening of the self is when you realize that you're on a search, and what the search is you want to find the answer to the question that God is asking you. And the answer to the question that God is asking you is only found if you see having a self as a task put before you by God. So that's what happens in the later novels, although he deals with the from the aesthetic to the ethical as a lot, because that's kind of where the big turns are, from the aesthetic to the ethical and from the ethical to the religious. Those are the two, for Kierkegaard, those are the two sort of big turning points in a person's life on a religious journey. And the search, gets turned into, silly things like, I want to find the last crown of the King of England that's been buried in this. These searches that aren't existential searches, they get literalized into these literal searches. I want to be the best ping pong player in the world, and then you achieve being the best ping pong player in the world, and what is that? You start looking at yourself, and well, is that what I was put on earth to do? Is my life over now? Is that, or did I misread those signs as to what my relationship to myself is really all about? And so those become the questions that Percy explores, and they're very interesting questions because you see them, in movies all the time, like the like the bored billionaire or something, or the who becomes a hoarder, and is paranoid. He gets everything he wants, and now he's just a hoarding guy who has 5 islands or whatever. But then Walker Percy says, well, let's look deeper into this. Let's look, what is this guy exhibiting that is just a higher volume of what I do, right? I hoard stuff too. I think that if I get that new car, or if I get that new job, or if I get the 10,000th podcast viewer, that somehow meaning will occur into my human account. but it doesn't, because meaning isn't for Kierkegaard, meaning it doesn't occur in terms of like what it means to your identity. It's a change of your existential orientation to live in meaning, not to attain it or hold it. And there's a thing that he gets into, and when we get to Václav Havel, we'll be talking about him later in the book, but there's a sense where existential meaning, there's existential meaning that is sort of psychological, but then there's ontological existential meaning that is a whole life orientation. So you can go in and out of meaning as a human being, and it's weird when that happens, because you don't know whether you've lost your faith or whether you're just in a psychological downspin or something. And Walker Percy likes to explore that in different characters. So he's got the character of the moviegoer. His aunt has everything she ever wanted, but there is a sense that she never went on a search. She never felt that she was being addressed by God, or that there was a larger responsibility to relate herself to the absolute. And so he says, there's a great paragraph. He said, all my family thought that anybody that sought any meaning beyond being able to pay your creditors and living well on the Gulf Coast was either crazy or a criminal, and should have been watched or sent to a psychiatrist. And for him, those are the people that are living in dread, because they're not even aware that they don't know that there's a larger possibility of realizing one's obligations to the absolute, or living in the grace of God, letting the things that happen to you direct you on a deeper, larger, more meaningful path than you can even imagine. And if you can't imagine that reality, then you live in a kind of despair, because the things that happen to you in the world are meaningless now, other than the value you can invest in them in terms of their pleasure or your ego. And those things are not ultimately satisfying, and it isn't because they're not have a kind of satisfaction to them. It's that ontologically they're not really what your being wants or why you're here. So at one point he says in the future, he's saying that now these questions of ontological meaning or existential meaning have to do with the 3 prongs of the delta factor, which is the semiological model. that the meaning of signs is not stimulus response. The meaning of signs is they initiate you into a third consciousness, a third element, which is human consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're only responding to signs and stimulus response, you can't imagine the reality of another person's subjectivity, which is what human beings learn when they learn language, that there's another person with equal subjectivity as they do. And so they share being with other people. And so when you share being with other people, that makes you wonder, well, is there some larger consciousness which transcends all our individual? Well, there is, it's language, but language exists within human consciousness and the sign. So that's why he's really interested in semiotics. And that's why Helen Keller is a great example for him.
Yeah, that would be a good segue into this part.
Yeah.
And I'll just read from your book because it also sets up that other cool question from Lost in the Cosmos that you talked about.
Yeah. Okay.
With the alien.
Yeah. Right.
But before I do that, there's a trifecta that he's explaining, that you explained his idea in this chapter, is like there's a person. I drew a triangle.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
There's a person, like a stick figure, and then there's a table. The table is the thing. And then there's a word. The word at the top of the triangle is table. So person, table is the word, and then the thing that is a table is separate from the word table.
Right.
And in the middle of the triangle is self. In his last book, Lost in the Cosmos, Percy tells us that if aliens from another planet ever landed on Earth, our first question to them should be, did it happen to you too? By this, Percy means, did your calculative capacities come with an awareness of quote-unquote self? Or is your intelligence entirely the product of unconscious circuitry? Put another way, are you just very highly evolved ants, or do you have a soul? Are you human, or are you machine? Unlike ants, human beings act not as this is all Professor writing. Unlike ants, human beings act not as organisms living in an environment, but as selves operating in a cosmos. Nature works dialectically through stimulus response and objects bumping into other objects. Language, however, operates triadically through signs and objects mediated by selves. To illustrate exactly what this means, Percy uses Helen Keller's account, and I thought this story was just so powerful to explain the concept. And you obviously made that connection in your book. Percy uses Helen Keller's account of her breakthrough into language, and hence into selfhood, dramatized in Arthur Penn's film of William Gibson's Pulitzer Prize-winning play, The Miracle Worker. So this is from a movie, I guess, of a play.
Yeah.
But it's talking about when Helen Keller discovered what was happening between language and herself, her internal world and her external world, and words, trying to understand all that. So to recount the scene, Annie Sullivan is sitting at the family dinner table celebrating Helen's return to the family home after living in isolation with Annie for 2 weeks of intense language training. Helen's father, a traditional Victorian patriarch, is ecstatic because Annie has succeeded in teaching the girl table manners. But Annie is frustrated because the child still hasn't grasped the fundamental symbolic connection between signs and things, between language and reality. She hasn't entered the triadic community and so is not yet a human being. To see if the rigorous discipline established over the past 2 weeks still applies in her parents' home, Helen begins to forget her manners and drops her napkin. The mother wishes to let this indiscretion go uncorrected, but Annie demands that Helen pick it up. In defiance, Helen sweeps her arms across the table, smashes the china, and sends her mother's roast flying across the room. She then takes a pitcher of water and splashes it in Annie's face. Annie drags Helen outside and makes her refill the pitcher at the water pump. As she does so, she begins for the millionth time to sign the words into Helen's hand, and then place Helen's hands upon the signed objects. Pump, Annie shouts, and thrusts Helen's hands to the pump handle. She signs P-U-M-P. Water, she shouts, and thrusts Helen's hands under the streaming water, cold water, as she signs W-A-T-E-R. It is clear that Annie is not doing this because she thinks Helen will learn this time, but simply because she doesn't know what else to do. Helen continues to resist, crying, kicking, pushing, and pulling away. Then, as instantly as it began, Helen's tantrum stops. She becomes quiet, absorbed, perfectly still. Wrapped with attention, she finally makes a connection between words and things, signs and experience, and for the first time in her life, she grasps the idea that things have names. Helen whispers, Wawa, in the moment that she is transformed from an organism in an environment to a self in the world, from an animal into a human being. But then what happens next is every bit as moving, just as important. She whirls around the yard, trying to touch everything, thirsty for the signs to describe her world, the signs that give things their human reality. What's this? Helen indicates, touching a post. And this, and this, and this. Annie calls out to Helen's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Keller, come. Helen knows. She knows. What does she know? She knows that humans share truth through signs, that she is not alone in her interior life, that there is a shape to human experience, and that her every experience has a matching word and hence a meaning. This knowledge is, in essence, the awareness of what it means to be a human being. It is one's initiation into the human cosmos. Helen's parents emerge from their dining room, and Helen touches their faces and signs their names, knowing them as part of her human world for the first time. Then she stops and touches Annie's face, and Annie signs out the word Teacher, and she knows who it is that finally bridged her spiritual isolation. It's an absolutely amazing story.
Yeah.
And you can feel how the way the story is told there in your writing, and obviously the movie did an amazing job, is like you feel her like an awareness being created that almost feels like a new birth.
Well, it is. It is a new birth. It's the birth of a self. She had learned signs before. She could sign hello, goodbye, thank you, but they were signs that weren't connected with a system. She didn't. They were just sort of,
or with things. With
things, yeah. They were just sort of like a dog who knows how to sit. They were dyadic, it kind of thing, a sound, and you do this. And this was the first time she broke into the triadic dimension, and it opened up a whole cosmos.
Yeah.
And, that's a very, I always thought that was very powerful in the film, but it wasn't until I read Walker Percy and his reference to it that I realized that behind that lies a whole, anthropology, and consciousness as being, with sentience. You're with everyone's sentience, that shares the language and the cosmos that you live in. So that becomes something that speaks to a deeper reality than simply, the instrumental nature of language. And
like it entered her into a communicable world.
Yeah.
Where things could be communicated, like about things. Like animals can communicate, but they can't sit there and communicate about philosophy and spirituality, like with words.
Well, Walker Percy, and I think it's Lost in the Cosmos, he said the reason that scientists want to talk to dolphins is that they find their fellow Americans so boring. And that's really true. The dolphins live in their cosmos more than their friends do. And the problems with communication are, these problems of self, identity, and soul, and they're not, that a dolphin is necessarily going to tell me something I didn't know, but, why can't I just talk to my neighbor? Well, try it, see how well it goes. And the moviegoer, it's sort of the same thing. He's talking to his family, he's talking to his girlfriend, and he's undergoing his own sort of existential crisis as to who he is, what he wants, how does he search for what his relationship to the absolute really is in an environment in which those things are not talked about or understood, or the Kierkegaardian categories seem these ontological Kierkegaardian categories are not accepted or understood or even taken seriously. So he tries to imagine what that would feel like, where you only get your existential moments from movies, and then try to talk about it and try to understand what's going on in it, and then how that might affect you in your relationships with other people, because they're caught up in these same dilemmas as well as each of us are. Our cosmos doesn't necessarily fit. That's why the example that you're going to use with the alien from outer space is a good one. Because when the aliens land, are they stimulus response beings who evolved into space travel, or are they semiological creatures who, like ourselves, have a self and an identity? And if they have a self, then I think that in one of the follow-up questions, where if the alien says it happened to us too, we have a self, the follow-up questions are things like, is that why you came here? Because you're lonely? Or did you come here because you want to take revenge on us as scapegoats for your loneliness?
Yeah.
Are you going to eat us? Are you going to kill us? Are you going to love us? What are you going to do? Are you God's creature, or are you the creatures of the Black Lagoon or whatever?
Yeah.
So it creates for very funny moments in his books that are kind of mind-boggling and unexpected, because you don't hear that kind of conversation in movies, except, you do from time to time, but sci-fi tries to go, doesn't sort of stay in the natural world. It tries to make science itself transcendent, or art itself transcendent, which is a tip of the hat to God and the absolute, certainly. But when it's in a movie, where the ultimate reality is, life on some planet somewhere in a space warp, it kind of takes it away from its reality. It becomes a fantasy. It doesn't become our natural experience, which is really what he's writing about. He's writing about our natural world, our frustration with looking for meaning, or trying to talk to meaning to another person and finding out they're living in a different cosmos.
Yeah.
And then
There's
the
part here in your book where he's saying that for thousands of, well, you're saying, but you're talking about his argument.
Yeah.
And Lost in the Cosmos. For thousands of years, myth enabled us to find ourselves in a world, to know who we were and what our lives meant. And I do think that and then you go on to say that the 20th century, with its metaphysical skepticism and reductionist science, severed that connection. So now mankind, according to Percy, is lost in the cosmos. Mm-hmm. And I think Americans might have that to a secondary degree of being severed from original homelands. Mm-hmm. So you've not only lost, especially modern Americans, where most would be agnostic, unless they are a part of some faith, but I'd say the majority are probably some type of agnostic and some atheists. But for thousands of years, to kind of have a worldview story, and now the scientists or the atheists or the Dawkins would call it, myth or legend, to keep people having some sort of social cohesion. Mm-hmm. But the modern American, not only if they're severed from that, some sort of a faith in the greater story, they're also severed from their homeland. So if you were, whether you were African or you were South American or you were Asian or even European like myself, like to be severed from Norway, I find out I'm like 50% Norwegian. So like I have nothing from that. I'm completely severed from that, you know?
Yeah.
I know like 2 words and a dessert from Norway.
Yeah.
Like I'm completely cut off from whatever myth my ancestry would have handed me down from the transition to America in my ancestry. And it's not just, you know, you think of that as just an African American thing that was done by force, but it was also done by poverty and by opportunity for others, like where they, you know, not as tragic, but they still ended up getting cut off from their history, really, because America became kind of like the new thing that you care about. And like similar to when a Mexican family moves here and the children don't want to learn the language, or the parents don't value them learning the language.
Yeah.
And then the kids are they're confused. Like, should I have learned the language? Or, you know, a lot of Mexican adults I talk to, they're like, yeah, I really wish my parents would have done it in the house, but they were trying to assimilate. And, you know, then there's a huge loss of connection to your previous culture. And, you know, obviously a lot of that comes with its mythic understanding of the world that we all would have had from whatever culture we had come from. I think it's just all that to say, I think we have multiple layers of that being severed at this point. So people today, they just latch on to whatever, sports or music or movies, or just like Percy's talking about. They latch on to something for entertainment in a world with no meaning, and then they hope for some meaning, but they don't really count on it.
Yeah, well, it's in that phrase that he uses, you know, that the search for the self is not exhausted by roles, pleasures, or explanations. Despair is not failing to find meaning, it's failing to know that meaning is missing.
Yeah, that's true despair.
Yeah. To be onto something is to know that your life is asking you a question. To miss that entirely is despair. It's not a feeling. It's the lack that goes with the self's hunger for the absolute, for God. Yeah. Anxiety is the dizziness of freedom. And so as a result of this, it makes for the very interesting novels, because what does he say? To be on a search is to be onto something.
Thank you for listening to the Subversive Orthodoxy podcast. I hope today's conversation stirred something in you, whether you're a skeptic, a believer, or someone on a deconstruction journey. Come with us as we keep exploring what it means to seek meaning in a dehumanizing age, guided by prophetic voices who wrestled with faith and doubt, paradox and nihilism. Because a prophetic imagination rarely speaks from the places we expect. It doesn't stay locked up in pulpits or seminaries. It breaks through in novels and poetry, charity, and art, through the strange and the quiet and the overlooked margins of culture. Thank you for listening. If you love our podcast or find it meaningful, here are some ways you can connect and share. Please subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already, leave a 5-star review, and share with anyone who might resonate. Please follow us on Instagram at Subversive Orthodoxy. You can email us at subversiveorthodoxy@gmail.com. And now you can find podcast extras as well as all of my other creative work at my Substack, beingtravismullen.substack.com. Thank you.
Spiritually, I wanna jump off a cliff without a parachute, like I'm high on cannabis, and skip through fields naked, like I wonder if I could drift, or if I could drift through it, dancing through moonlight under night.
This has been the Subversive Orthodoxy podcast with Travis Mullen and Professor Inchausti.
Looking through a stained glass oceanic scene, say hi to human beings with a smile unseen, grabbing wildflowers as I slide down hills after a rain, after some.